The Republican response from Governor Nikki Haley of South Carolina. Governor Haley didn't mention Donald Trump's name either, but she seemed, like President Obama before her, to be directing some of her remarks in Donald Trump's way. John Dickerson?
That's right. And she also said Republicans have some share of blame in the current political difficulties we have. She may have set the new standard for these kinds of response speeches. It's usually a loser's game, but she was short. She stood up for Republican values, and it was a good delivery.
She offered a pragmatic prescription for her party, a rebuttal to the president. This is the third time the Republican Party has turned to a woman to follow the president, and Nikki Haley is one of the bright, shining stars of the Republican Party who could just end up on the ticket in November for them.
There will be a great deal more about the State of the Union address first thing tomorrow with Norah and Charlie and Gail on CBS This Morning. Our coverage continues tonight on our 24-hour digital news network, CBSN, available on all devices at cbsnews.com. For now, with thanks to the Jones Day Law Firm for this view of the Capitol, with John Dickerson and Norah O'Donnell, I'm Scott Pelley, CBS News in Washington.
CBS News coverage of the State of the Union address continues now on CBSN. Here's Scott Pelley.
Now that we have heard President Obama's final State of the Union address and the Republican response from South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, we're going to have more analysis for you tonight on what all of this means and what it means to the presidential race going forward. We're going to go first to Margaret Brennan, who's been watching all of this for us at the White House tonight. Margaret?
Scott, the president's message tonight was really one of reassurance and a sharp push back against this dark message that America is in decline, something you hear on the campaign trail a lot these days. The president didn't name any of the candidates by name, but he certainly addressed the anxieties that many have brought up, saying Americans shouldn't fear the type of international instability out there, this fast-moving global economic change. In fact, what they need is a plan for the new global order. And he laid out his vision for that, arguing that a successor should be elected that'll carry out that view. For him, that's meant negotiating with your enemies, whether it's Iran or Cuba. It's meant really trying to not put American boots on the ground, but instead harness international coalitions like the one he's leading against ISIS. That was the president's argument, not only to defend his track record so far, but to argue that the American public should support what is an unfamiliar path for many, saying explicitly the Cold War is over, reject that old model, here's your model for the future, and America, you should be optimistic about the future. Don't bet on the alternative.
Margaret Brennan at the White House for us tonight. Our Major Garrett has been covering the candidates on the political trail, and he has some of the early reaction from them. Major?
Well, it's been interesting, Scott. You know, there's a secondary conversation in America now on big speeches like this, because on Twitter and other social media, there's another conversation along with whatever is happening live. And usually it is somewhat lively. Tonight it was a bit restrained, not as much, in the technical term, Scott, is trolling on Twitter as we've grown accustomed to at previous Republican and Democratic debates. One thing notable, though, Bernie Sanders did not say anything on Twitter about this speech. Hillary Clinton did, echoing the president on three key policy points, standing with him on standing up against the gun lobby and calling for more gun restrictions or firearms restrictions, applauding the president on the Affordable Care Act and 18 million Americans covered, and also saying the president's right to make it easier and call for it to be easier for Americans to vote and participate in the democratic process. On the Republican side, the unnamed central character of the president's speech, Donald Trump, said this: the speech was slow, lethargic, very hard to watch, in his words, on Twitter. And he also said the Iran deal is terrible. Jeb Bush was also somewhat more active than we've seen him before on Twitter, denouncing the president for saying foreign policy is secure, saying that Syria is in crisis, ISIS is on the move, and the Taliban is resurgent. The president, in Jeb Bush's words, is living in a different world. He also said when it comes to middle-class incomes, the economy is not nearly as strong as the president represented. That's the overall Twitter reaction. One observation I would make, Scott, about this speech. As you indicated, the president doesn't have much hope for substantial legislative achievements this year. So what's the next best thing he can do? Establish a predicate for the thing that absolutely guarantees any two-term president's legacy. What is that? A victory by his party for essentially a third term. And that was, by every definition, the goal of this speech, to establish a predicate for the Democratic conversation for the future, whether it be Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders.
Our veteran political correspondent, Major Garrett, in our Washington newsroom tonight. Major, thank you very much. We're also watching in the other screen there pictures of the president as he was approaching the podium there and earlier tonight, preparing to deliver his 7th and last State of the Union address. Cheers from the First Lady there, of course. I want to turn to Norah O'Donnell and John Dickerson and talk just a little bit about the rather remarkable speech we just heard from Nikki Haley, the Republican response. Norah, I don't think there is any other way to look at this but an attempt to distance the Republican Party from Donald Trump.
I would agree. And, you know, sometimes giving the response to the president for both Democrats and Republicans has been like a curse. In this case, Governor Nikki Haley's address may have been the model that others will try and follow in the past. And you're right, Scott. On several occasions, she appeared to try and distance her party from that of Donald Trump. On the issue of immigration, she said it may be tempting to follow the siren call of the angriest voices. We must resist that temptation. And she didn't just make the argument rhetorically, she made it personally by referencing the fact that her own parents are immigrants from India. She's the first Indian American governor of South Carolina and the second only in America following Governor Bobby Jindal. So I think in that way, too, she was setting out a different tone, too, about the angriest siren call, the loudest voices, that they're offering a more sort of pragmatic vision, if you will, for the party.
One of the things she said was some people think you have to be the loudest voice in the room to make a difference. That is just not true. The best thing we can do is turn down the volume.
Yeah,
John?
This was not the Republican response to the president. It was the Republican response to the Republican Party's frontrunner. And one thing that I thought we also should not forget, she is the governor of the third state in the nominating process, a very important state, and everybody wants
Trump
to.
is well ahead, right?
A state where he is very well ahead. And we also should note she told the story of the horrible shooting in Charleston in the Mother Emanuel Church, which is the storytelling version. Of what she was saying, what she was articulating, which is forgiveness in the face of danger. What would be the natural response to a horrible shooting like that? Would be to react in fear and anger, and instead they reacted in forgiveness and love. That is not the message you hear on the campaign trail. It was pretty extraordinary in a short little speech like this.
Especially to be the official Republican response. I mean, to me, this is the Republican Party saying, we're not subscribing to this Donald Trump message.
And just to revisit that terrible episode when 9 church members were lost, the response quickly by Governor Haley was to bring down and call for the bringing down of the Confederate flag, which was right outside the state capitol in Columbia, South Carolina. And she was widely praised by her people in her own party and in the Democratic Party for doing just that. But her speech, while critical of the president's policies, also struck this broader theme of unity, a way forward, a different kind of politics, which I think was one of the goals of the president's speech tonight, was to talk about how do we reach a different kind of politics.
Major Garrett in our Washington newsroom, let me bring you into this conversation.
So, Scott and Norah and John, what's interesting is the conversation that has gone on behind the scenes for months among big donors in the Republican Party and their consultantocracy here in the Beltway, if you will. What do you do about Donald Trump? Do you take him on? Do you spend the money to try to knock him out? The answer to that has always been no, we're not going to do it. No one has marshaled a campaign. No one has put together consultants, ads, money, or anything else. And Donald Trump has essentially gone effectively untouched by the establishment of the Republican Party, by their own choice, though this conversation has been roiling for months. What you saw tonight was one blow struck by the establishment, if you will, against Donald Trump. Who selected Nikki Haley to deliver the Republican response? Mitch McConnell and Speaker Paul Ryan. This morning over breakfast, Paul Ryan said his idea for Republicans in Congress is to establish an agenda, a legislative agenda, even if the president doesn't go along with it, that establishes the Republican as a proposition party, the Republican Party as a proposition party. We said to him, but Mr. Speaker, much of what you just laid out, Donald Trump disagrees with, and to a lesser extent, Ted Cruz disagrees with, both of whom are certainly very viable possibilities as Republican nominees. Paul Ryan said, his agenda is a byproduct, at least, of that anxiety among Republicans that they need to define themselves differently from Donald Trump and Ted Cruz should they become the nominee. So tonight's speech from Nikki Haley, from my vantage point, is part and parcel of this establishment so-called or mainstream Republican reaction to Trump. But one speech following the president's on the State of the Union, any consultant in Washington will tell you, will not be enough. If the Republican Party really wants to marshal itself and its donor-based resources, you're going to have to see something happen, and happen very quick.
Norah?
It's a brilliant set of points there that Major made. I was just struck by the notion that perhaps it took a woman to get done what many other men in the Republican Party have had trouble doing.
I don't guess you can argue with that. That's
sister.
That's exactly what happened.
And to your point, John was just showing me Reince Priebus, who's the chairman of the Republican Party, what he just tweeted about Nikki Haley. He said,
fantastic balance and substance. Our party is the new, young, and diverse party. That's the chairman of the Republican Party hailing Nikki Haley. And now what'll be interesting, to Major's point, is how do you sustain this? If this is the beginning or the first major attempt to push back at Trump and what he is creating, what do the other Republican candidates do? How much is this ball kept rolling, or does this end and that's it?
Well, speaking of brilliant women of politics, we have Nancy Cordes, our veteran correspondent at the Capitol, and we'll switch from the Republicans just for a moment to the Democrats. Nancy, fascinating new polling information in our CBS News poll. The race between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders getting very tight.
That's right. And, you know, Scott, for months we've been captivated by the Republican race with good reason. It's unpredictable, it's unprecedented, but we got the best evidence yet today that there is a real race heating up on the Democratic side, too. Not just our new CBS News poll, which shows that Hillary Clinton's lead nationally over Bernie Sanders has been cut in half, but a slew of new polls in New Hampshire and Iowa. One in New Hampshire showing Bernie Sanders pulling away, gaining a 14-point lead over Hillary Clinton. Another poll in Iowa showing that he's got a 5-point lead now. He was behind by 11 points in that same poll just last month. Now, the Clinton campaign argues that you can't draw any conclusions from one poll here or there. But Hillary Clinton, make no mistake, has realized that she needs to start going after Bernie Sanders in a way that she has been reluctant to in the past. And Sanders told us today he's taken notice.
I think yesterday we had 3 or 4 separate attacks. And when you see that many attacks, and I am sure that more will be coming, it is an indication that the Clinton campaign is getting very, very nervous.
Even if you win in Iowa and in New Hampshire, how do you compete in South Carolina, in Florida, states where Hillary Clinton has a huge organization and a huge head start in the polls?
Gee, Nancy, that's the question that was asked to me 8.5 months ago about Iowa and New Hampshire. Well, things have changed. Things will change in Nevada. Things will change in South Carolina.
But they're going to have to change not in 8.5 months. They're going to have to change in a few weeks.
Well, we have pretty good ground organizations as well.
Clinton supporters insist that her operation in Iowa and New Hampshire is more sophisticated. They have a lot more experience getting out the vote. But if Sanders' rallies are any indication, he has no trouble getting his supporters out either. He's routinely garnering 1,000, 1,500 people at his events, much larger than the events that Clinton has been holding, for example, in Iowa, Scott.
Nancy Cordes with the key interview tonight on Capitol Hill. Nancy, thanks very much.